the Flies by William Golding, page 24. The pink granite of the next cliff was further back from the creepers and trees so that they could trot up the path. This again led into more open forest so that they had a glimpse of the spread sea. With openness came the sun. It dried the sweat that had soaked their clothes in the dark, damp heat. At last, the way to the top looked like a scramble over pink rock, with no more plunging through darkness. The boys chose their way through defiles of overheaps of sharp stone. Look! Look! High over this end of the island, the shattered rocks lifted up their stacks and chimneys. This one, against which Jack leaned, moved with a grating sound when he pushed. Come on! But not come on to the top. The assault on the summit must wait while the three boys accepted this challenge. The rock was as large as a small motor car. Heave! Sway back and forth. Catch the rhythm. Heave! Increase the swing of the pendulum. Increase. Come up and bear against that point of furthest balance. Increase. Heave! The great rock loitered, poised on one toe, decided not to return, moved through the air, fell, struck, turned over, leapt, droning through the air, and smashed a deep hole in the pink dust floated. The forest further down shook as with the passage of an enraged monster, and then the island was still. Wacko! Like a bomb! Woo! Not for 5 minutes could they drag themselves away from this triumph, but they left at last. The way to the top was easy after that. As they reached the last stretch, Ralph stopped. Golly! They were on the lip of a circular hollow in the side of the mountain. This was filled with blue flower, a rock plant of some sort, and the overflow hung down the vent and spilled lavishly among the canopy of the forest. The air was thick with butterflies, lifting, fluttering, settling. Beyond the hollow was the square top of the mountains, and soon they were standing on it. They had guessed before this was an island, clambering among the pink rocks with the sea on either side and the crystal heights of air. They had known by some instinct that the sea lay on every side. But there seemed something more fitting in leaving the last word till they stood on the top and could see a circular horizon of water. Ralph turned to the others. This belongs to us. It was roughly boat-shaped, humped near the end, with behind them the jumbled descent to the shore. On either side, rocks, cliffs, treetops, and a steep slope. Forward there, the length of the boat, a tamer descent, tree-clad with hints of pink, and then the jungly flat of the island, dense green, but drawn at the end of a pink tail. There, where the island petered out in the water, was another island, a rock, almost detached, standing like a fort, facing them across the green, with one bold pink bastion. The boys surveyed all this, then looked out to sea. They were high up, and the afternoon had advanced. The view was not robbed of sharpness by mirage. That's a reef, a coral reef. I've seen pictures like that. The reef enclosed more than one side of the island, lying perhaps a mile out and parallel to what they now thought of as their beach. The coral was scribbled in the sea as though a giant had bent down to reproduce the shape of the island in the flowing chalk line, but tired before he had finished. Inside was peacock water, rocks and weeds showing as in an aquarium. Outside was the dark blue of the sea. The tide was running so that long streaks of foam tailed away from the reef, and for a moment they felt that the boat was moving steadily astern. Jack pointed down. That's where we landed. Beyond falls and cliffs, there was a gash visible in the trees. There were the splintered trunks, and then the drag, leaving only a fringe of palm between the scar and the sea. There, too, jutting into the lagoon, was the platform, with insect-like figures moving near it. Ralph sketched a twining line from the bald spot on which they stood down a slope, a gully, through flowers, round and down to the rock where the scar started. That's the quickest way back. Eyes shining, mouths open, triumphant, they savored the right of domination. They were lifted up, were friends. There's no village, Smoke. There's no boats. said Ralph wisely. We'll make sure later, but I think it's uninhabited. We'll get food, cried Jack. Hunt, catch things until they fetch us. Simon looked at them, saying nothing but nodding until his black hair flopped backwards and forwards. His face was glowing. Ralph looked down the other way where there was no reef. Steeper, said Jack. Ralph made a cupping gesture. That bit of forest down there, the mountains hold it up. Every point of the mountain held up trees, flowers, and trees. Now the forest stirred, roared, flailed. The near acres of rock flowers fluttered in half a minute. The breeze blew cool on their faces. Ralph spread his arms. All ours! They laughed and tumbled and shouted on the mountains. I'm hungry! When Simon mentioned his hunger, the others became aware of theirs. Come on, said Ralph. We found out what we wanted to know. They scrambled down a rock slope, dropped among the flowers, and made their way under the trees. Here they passed and examined the bushes around them curiously. Simon spoke first. Like candles, candle bushes, candle buds. The bushes were dark evergreen and aromatic, and the many buds were waxen green and folded up against the light. Jack slashed at it with his knife, and the scent spilled over them. Candle buds. You couldn't light them, said Ralph. They just look like candles. Green candles, said Jack contemptuously. So if he's saying something contemptuously, it means they're kind of like starting to do little slight, throw some shade at each other. We can't eat them. Come on. They were in the beginnings of the thick forest, plonking with wary feet on a track when they heard the noises squeaking and the hard strike of hooves on a path. As they pushed forward, the squeaking increased until it became a frenzy. They found a piglet caught in a curtain of creepers, throwing itself at the elastic traces in all the madness of extreme terror. Its voice was thin, needle sharp, and insistent. Three boys rushed forward and Jack drew his knife again with a flourish. He raised his arm in the air. There came a pause, a hiatus. The pig continued to scream and the creepers to jerk, and the blade continued to flash at the end of a bony arm. The pause was only long enough for them to understand what an enormity the downward stroke would be. Then the piglet tore loose from the creepers and scurried into the undergrowth. They were left looking at each other in a place of terror. Jack's face was white under the freckles. He noticed that he still held the knife aloft and brought his arm down, replacing the blade in the sheath. Then they all three laughed shamedly and began to climb back to the track. I was choosing a place, said Jack. I was just waiting for a moment to decide where to stab him. So now, Mr. Tough Guy Jack, in front of friends, can't pull the trigger. You should stick a pig, said Ralph fiercely. They always talk about sticking a pig. You cut a pig's throat to let the blood out, said Jack. Otherwise, you can't eat the meat. Why didn't you? They knew very well why he hadn't. Because of the enormity of the knife descending and cutting into living flesh. Because of the unbearable blood. I was going to, said Jack. He was ahead of them, and they could not see his face. I was choosing a place. Next time, He snatched his knife out of his sheath and slammed it into a tree trunk. Next time, there'd be no mercy. He looked around fiercely, daring them to contradict. Then they broke out into the sunlight, and for a while they were busy finding and devouring food as they moved down the scar toward the platform and the meeting. Whew. By the time Ralph finished blowing the conch, the platform was crowded. There were differences between the meeting and no one held in the morning. There were differences between this meeting and the one held in the morning. The afternoon sun slanted in from the other side of the platform, and most of the children, feeling too late the smart of sunburn, had put their clothes on. The choir, noticeably less of a group, had discarded their cloaks. Okay, so they're all sunburnt. Ralph sat on a fallen trunk, his left arm in the sun. On his right were most of the choir. On his left, the larger boys who had not known each other before the evacuation. Before him, small children squatted in the grass. So kids evac'd, just like the video you watched about children and the trauma from war. These kids were evac'd, and they think it was a nuclear war and maybe nuclear holocaust. Piggy said they are all dead. Silence now. Ralph lifted the cream and pink shell to his knees, and a sudden breeze scattered light over the platform. He was uncertain whether to stand up or remain sitting. He looked sideways to his left, toward the bathing pool. Piggy was sitting near, but giving no help. Ralph cleared his throat. Well then. All at once, he found he could talk fluently and explain what he had to say. He passed a hand through the air, his fair hair, and spoke. We're on an island. We've been on the mountaintop and seen water all around. We saw no houses, no smoke, no footprints, no boats, no people. We're on an uninhabited island and no other people on it. Jack broke in. All the same, you need an army for hunting pigs. Yes, there are pigs on the island. All three of them tried to convey the sense of the pink, live thing struggling in the creepers. We saw squealing. It broke away before I could kill it. But next time, Jack slammed his knife into the trunk and looking round challengingly. The meeting settled down again. So, you see, said Ralph, we need hunters to get us meat. And another thing. He lifted the shell to his knees and looked around the sun-slashed faces. There aren't any grown-ups. We shall have to look after ourselves. The meeting hummed and was silent. And another thing. We can't have everybody talking at once. We'll have to have hands up like at school. He held the conch before his face and glanced around the mouth. Then I'll give him the conch. Conch? That's what the shell's called. I'll give the conch to the next person to speak. He can hold it when he's speaking. But look! And he won't be interrupted, except by me. Jack was on his feet. Well, we'll have rules, he cried excitedly. Lots of rules. Then when anyone breaks them, wee-oh, wacko, bong, doink. Not sure. I think that's just like kids thinking that it's like, no responsibilities. Yes, we are our own bosses. Not realizing the danger involved. And plus the trauma of like knowing or thinking that everyone's dead where you're from. Now, eventually, someone's going to have to talk to somebody about this stuff. Ralph felt the conch lifted from his lap. Then Piggy was standing, cradling the great cream shell, and the shouting died down. Jack left on his feet, looked uncertainly at Ralph, who smiled and patted the log. Jack sat down. Piggy took off his glasses and blinked at the assembly while he wiped them on his shirt. You're hindering Ralph. You're not letting him get the most important thing. He paused effectively. Who knows we're here, eh? They knew at the airport. The man with the trumpet thing? My dad. Piggy put on his glasses. Nobody knows we're here. Nobody knows where we are, said Piggy. He was paler than before and breathless. Perhaps they knew where was going and perhaps not. But they don't know where we are. Because we never got there. He gaped at them for a moment, then swayed and sat down. Ralph took the conch from his hands. That's what I was going to say, he went on. When you he gazed at their intent faces. The plane was shot down in flames. Nobody knows where we are. We may be here a long time. The silence was so complete that they could hear the unevenness of Piggy's breathing. The sun slanted in and lay golden over half the platform. The breezes on the lagoon had chased their tails like kittens were finding their way across the platform and into the forest. Ralph pushed back the tangle of fair hair that hung over his forehead. So we may be here a long time. Nobody said anything. He grinned suddenly. But this is a good island. We, Jack, Simon, and me, we climbed the mountain. It's wizard. There's food and drinks and rocks. Blue flowers. Piggy, partly recovered, pointed to the conch in Ralph's hands, and Jack and Simon fell silent. Ralph went on. So Piggy's like the rule guy. Should Piggy maybe be in charge here more? While we're waiting, we can have a good time on this island. He gesticulated widely. It's like in a book. At once there was a clamor. Treasure Island, swallows and Amazons, Coral Island. Ralph waved the conch. This is our island. It's a good island. Until the grown-ups come to fetch us, we'll have fun. Jack held out his hand for the conch. There's pigs, he said. There's food and bathing water in the little stream along there, and everything. Didn't anyone find anything else? He handed the conch back to Ralph and sat down. Apparently no one had found anything. The older boys first noticed the child when he resisted. There was a group of little boys urging him forwards. Said he didn't want to go. He was a shrimp of a boy, about 6 years old, and one side of his face was blotted out by a mulberry-colored birthmark. He stood now, warped out of this perpendicular by the fierce light of publicity, and he bored into the coarse grass with one toe. He was muttering and about to cry. The other little boys, whispering but serious, pushed him toward Ralph. "All right," said Ralph. "Come on, then." The small boy looked round in panic. "Speak up." The small boy held out his hands for the conch, and the assembly shouted with laughter. At once he snatched back his hands and started to cry. "Let him have the conch," shouted Piggy. "Let him have it." At last Ralph induced him to hold the shell, but by then the blow of laughter had taken away the child's voice. Piggy knelt by him, one hand on the great shell, listening and interpreting to the assembly. "He wants to know what you're going to do about the snake thing." Ralph laughed, and the other boys laughed with him. The small boy twisted further into himself. "Tell us about the snake thing." "Now he says it was a beastie. Beastie, the snake thing. Ever so big. He saw it." "Where?" "In the woods." Either the wandering breezes or perhaps the decline of the sun allowed a little coolness to lie under the trees. The boys felt it and stirred restlessly. "You couldn't have a beastie, a snake thing on an island this size," Ralph explained kindly. "You only get them in big countries, like Africa and India." "Africa is not a country, Ralph!" Murmur and the grave nodding of heads. "He says the beastie came in the dark. Then he couldn't see it." Laughter and cheers. "Did you hear that? Say he saw the thing in the dark. He still says he saw the beastie. It came and went away again and came back and wanted to eat him." He was dreaming. Laughing, Ralph looked for confirmation around the ring of faces. The older boys agreed, but here and there among the little ones was the doubt that required more than rational assurance. He must have had a nightmare, stumbling about among all those creepers. More grave nodding, they knew about nightmares. "He says he saw the beastie, the snake thing, and will it come back tonight? But there isn't a beastie. He says in the morning it turned into them things like ropes in the trees and hung in the branches. He says, will it come back tonight? But there isn't a beastie." There was no laughter at all now, and more grave watching. Ralph pushed both hands through his hair and looked at the little boy in mixed amusement and exasperation. Jack seized the conch. "Ralph's right, of course. There isn't a snake thing. But if there was a snake thing, we'd hunt it and kill it. We're going to hunt pigs and get meat for everybody. And we'll look for the snake, too. But there isn't a snake. We'll make sure when we go hunting." Ralph was annoyed and for the moment defeated. He felt himself facing something ungraspable. The eyes that looked so intently at him were without humor. "But there isn't a beast." Something he had not known was there rose in him and compelled him to make the point loudly and again. "But I tell you, there isn't a beast." The assembly was silent. Ralph lifted the conch again, and his good humor came back as he thought of what he had to say next. "Now, we come to the most important thing. I've been thinking, I was thinking while we were climbing the mountain." He flashed a conspiratorial grin at the other two. "And on the beach just now, this is what I thought. We want to have fun, and we want to be rescued." The passionate noise of agreement from the assembly hit him like a wave, and he lost his thread. He thought again. "We want to be rescued, and of course we shall be rescued," voices babbled. A simple statement, unbacked by any proof, but the weight of Ralph's new authority brought light and happiness. He had to wave the conch before he could make them hear him. "My father's in the Navy. He said there aren't any unknown islands left. He says the Queen is a big room full of maps, and all the islands in the world are drawn on there. So the queen's got a picture of this island. Again came the sounds of cheerfulness and better heart. And sooner or later, a ship will put in here. It might even be Daddy's ship. So you see, sooner or later, we shall be rescued. He paused with a point made. The assembly was lifted towards safety by his words. They liked and now respected him. Spontaneously, they began to clap, and presently the platform was loud with applause. Ralph flushed, looking sideways at Piggy's open admiration, and then the other way at Jack, who was smirking and showing that he too knew how to clap. Ralph waved the conch. "Shut up! Wait! Listen!" He went on in the silence, borne on his triumph. "There's another thing. We can help them to find us. If a ship comes near the island, they may not notice us, so we must make smoke on top of the mountain. We must make a fire. A fire! Make a fire!" At once, half the boys were on their feet. Jack clamored among them, the conch forgotten. "Come on, follow me!" The space under the palm trees was full of noise and movement. Ralph was on his feet too, shouting for quiet, but no one heard him. All at once, the crowd swayed toward the island was gone. Following Jack, even the tiny children went and did their best among the leaves and the broken branches. Ralph was left, holding the conch, with no one but Piggy. Piggy's breathing was quite restored. "Like kids," he said scornfully, acting like a crowd of kids. Ralph looked at him doubtfully and said the conch on the tree trunk. "I bet it's gone. Tea time. What do they think they're going to do on that mountain?" He caressed the shell respectfully, then stopped and looked up. "Ralph, hey, where are you going?" Ralph was already clambering over the first smashed swathes of the scar. A long way ahead of him was crashing and laughter. Piggy watched him in disgust. Like a crowd of kids, he sighed, bent and laced up his shoes. The noise was the errant assembly faded up the mountain. Then, with the martyred expression of a parent who was to keep up with the senseless ebullience of the children, he picked up the conch, turned toward the forest, and began to pick his way over the tumbled scar.